Greetings and salutations, Scribblers. I hope everyone is feeling good, taking care of themselves. I hope you're drinking your water, you're getting some rest, that you're taking your meds, whatever it is that you need to do for your self-care, just keep making time to do it. Today's video is going to tackle the element of pacing in a novel. So we're going to talk about what it is, why it's important, and then give you some strategies to improve the pacing in your own manuscripts. So let's just dive right in. What is pacing? In writing, pacing is how quickly the narrative moves from start to finish. And you've probably read books that were kind of slow to start out. You maybe had trouble getting into them, just things aren't moving very quickly. Sometimes a book might get bogged down in the middle, or you may be left wondering if the author forgot to submit a chapter because all of a sudden everything's over and things are just wrapped up. So if you've ever experienced any of these things as a reader, then you've noticed that the pacing of the novel felt off. So, before we keep going, it is really important to note that sometimes a novel is moving slow on purpose. So, there's different styles of writing, there's different cultural conventions. So, you always need to take into account things like that when you're considering the pacing of a novel. Sometimes it is the pacing, and sometimes it's just that you aren't used to that style of writing or that convention or cultural of writing, right? So always keep that in the back of your mind and think really critically about why the pacing of the novel might not be working for you. So, a great way to really understand the basics of pacing is to use a plot graph. So if you look at the exposition, it's pretty level. This is the steady part of your novel. It's not too fast, not slow. It's just right, and it doesn't last too long. Next, we have the inciting incident, the rising action. So this is sloping upwards and it's growing. So it needs to keep moving at a steady marching pace. We get to the top of that arc up here, and we have that dark night of the soul, and it really just levels out, and we linger there for a moment, right? We develop that tension that's going to drop us into that falling action and propel us back to the resolution. So that plot graph has that bell curve shape, right? And you'll notice that there's often more events and things happening in the rising action than in the falling action, but they seem to get equal weight. So the rising action is often going to get more page time. It's going to be roughly 50% of the novel. It's all those things that are happening to get us to that dark night of the soul, to get us to that moment where the hero finally overcomes and they win. But the falling action happens slowly. And most writers will really slow down that pace and let us linger and wallow in the character's anguish and despair as they lose all hope, try desperately to overcome their obstacles. Another way to look at this or to think about it is to think about how in movies we get to that final battle, right? Lord of the Rings is a great example. Frodo has to throw that ring into the fires of Mount Doom. And when we get to that point, everything slows down. And we get, those long shots of the character expressions and the slow motion action shots. And this is really done on purpose. And it's using that pacing that helps to develop that emotional engagement for the viewer or the reader. So you're going to be doing the same thing, but you're doing it on the page rather than visually in a film. So, as a writer, it's really important to be able to anticipate what your audience is going to want to go by quickly and what they want to linger in and enjoy in the story. Unfortunately, there is no magic formula for learning this, and there's no tried and true constant answer. It's going to be based on just myriad factors. There's no way to just there's no formula for it, right? One of the best ways to learn about pacing is to read a lot of books and specifically look at whether you thought it was too slow, too fast, or just right. So it's really, it's a bit of a Goldilocks situation, right? And if you have reading buddies and they've read the same book, ask them how they felt the pacing was. Whether you feel the same or different, you'll get to discuss why those discrepancies are happening and what those are the discussions that then really lead to you learning about pacing because now you're really starting to break it down and analyze what's happening. You can also, if you don't have somebody who's read the same book as you, but you're dying to know, you can look at a reading tracker app like Storygraph. It's this great tracker app. It's the one I use to keep track of all the books I've read. But at the end, it kind of asks you this little questionnaire about the book so you can rate it. And one of the questions it asks when you leave your review is how you felt the pacing was. Was it slow, medium, or fast? So you can then answer that and compare your response with other readers. You can see, wow, 30% of people thought that this moved too fast, and 20 people thought, 20% of people thought it was too slow, and then the other 50% of us thought it was just right. And you can start to think about why they might have felt that way. And then you can always go on to read the reviews and see if you can get some more information on that. But just seeing that of how different people view various books is really, really interesting. So hitting those pacing beats is really what's going to make an impact on your reader. So if you move forward too quickly, they might get frustrated, maybe even feel a little confused because there isn't enough there to really satisfy them. On the other hand, you don't want to get so entrenched in the details that your reader feels bored. This can border on info dumping, which is something you generally want to avoid. So it's really, like I said, it's that Goldilocks situation. You have to hit that sweet spot with pacing. And it's like a vibe. You just got to like figure out what it is. So, with that being said, how can you try to ensure that you're hitting that pacing, that you're getting the vibe right for your book, for your reader, and not getting stuck? One thing you can do is to look at each scene and ensure that it's providing new and intriguing information about the character and plot. So if you're seeing redundancy in your scenes, your pacing might be too slow because we're not moving the story forward. And that can get difficult because we might write a scene that we really love and it's something that's near and dear to us, and it might be something that needs to go just because it's already happened in another way. So you have to choose which one do you like better, or maybe find a way to combine those two scenes that are redundant. Another tip to improve your pacing is to pare down your character's movements to the essentials. For example, if they're coming home from work, we don't need to know every detail of them walking in the door, taking off their shoes at the door, and changing into the slippers before hanging their keys on the key hook, picking up their briefcase, so that they can walk down the hall and into the kitchen, where they put the briefcase down on the table so they can open the fridge and get out the water and put it on the counter, then go to the cupboard and get a glass. You get the idea. Instead, you could potentially like skip right to them getting that water and leaning against the counter after a rough day at work, because that's more of what the reader is probably interested in. They want to see that internalization, that thought process of, wow, why is this character just like not feeling well? Why are they unhappy? What's bothering them? What's going on in their head? You have to remember, I feel like there's lots of caveats with pacing, but there are. So just remember, it depends on what you want to emphasize and the experience that you want the reader to have. So I've noticed that a lot of writers start out this way with their first ever manuscripts. A lot of the page time is dedicated to telling us what the character is doing without including that internalization or a lot of emotion. It starts to read a bit like an incident report, like, so this is what they're doing right now. So part of pacing is really keeping the balance of painting the picture of what the character is doing, because the reader obviously has to know those things, while also trusting that the reader is going to make logical connections based on typical behavior patterns. Sometimes you can sum things up in a single line, and that's that telling, right? So that's a place where telling is really great. Sally went through the motions of getting ready for bed. I have just summed up like perhaps a 30 to 45-minute process for Sally. We don't know. And that's all that we really need to know. So I've skipped over her changing into pajamas, brushing her teeth, doing her nightly skincare routine, turning down the sheets, letting her dog out one last time, putting a glass of water by the bed. All these different things that Sally might do that you could include, like maybe little elements of that, but really it might bog down the pacing. So unless you're really emphasizing the routines that Sally has, that might be something that you would cut out and just sum it up with one line. She went through the motions of getting ready for bed. What we do really want always, regardless of which path you follow, though, is those thoughts that are going through her head and how she processes the fact that Kelly just broke up with her. So that's what the reader is really, really interested in. And, is it part of that story where she's so upset by this breakup that it's making her skip her normal routine? Or is she kind of like still leaning into that as a crutch to kind of get her through this unspoken territory, this brand new thing of the breakup? So really think about what you're going to emphasize. All right. Another tip, if you are a visual learner like me, then you might want to pick up a copy of your favorite book. Get out your highlighters, get out your post-it flags, and just have a go at dividing that book into sections. So I did this really early on in my writing career with V.E. Schwab's A Darker Shade of Magic. And I created actually like a whole spreadsheet that went chapter by chapter, keeping track of chapter length versus the amount of time that was passing in the novel, versus what part of the novel it was. And I had a lot of other things in there because I took the time and I really, really deconstructed this novel because it was something that I loved to read and I thought it was so brilliantly done. I wanted to understand how it worked. So I have like all sorts of data on my little spreadsheet table that I made. Um, and I personally use the 4-act structure to plot. So when I deconstructed this novel, I looked at what chapters and pages fit into each act. So Act 1 would be your exposition. So that's that bottom level of your plot graph. Acts 2 and 3 are a part of the rising action. So that's all the things that are happening to get you up to that like dark night of the soul. And then Act 4 takes the falling action down into the denouement. So that's how I kind of do my plot structure. My big takeaway from this entire exercise, though, was the first 3 acts of the novel cover weeks. Like a lot of time goes by, like weeks, weeks. The last act, though, that last part of the book, the falling action, covered less than 24 hours total and was given about 100 pages of real estate in a 400-page novel. So within those 100 pages, there was 30 pages devoted to a main fight between the characters Kel and the Dane twins. So that's like, again, that's a lot of real estate to give to a single moment in a novel. And this really fascinated me to know that once I get through a few drafts for my own, I evaluate how much page time is being given to each part of my plot. So this model kind of matches up with that idea of the movie where you get to the end, that big final last battle, and you start seeing the slow-mo moments and those really lingering shots of the characters' facial expressions, or as they decide, like, how are they going to do this? How is Frodo going to finally get up and like throw that ring into the fires of Mount Doom? And that to me is just fascinating because we're doing the same thing but on with like written words. So in most cases that like where you've spent 300 some pages getting to know your characters, the reader then wants to get into that nitty gritty of their struggle and their choices. So it's just really interesting. And I highly recommend, like I said, just taking your favorite book and just deconstructing it from that point of view of how much space is given to each act and which parts of that plot arc are being addressed there. So, like I mentioned before, pacing is definitely one of the Goldilocks of writing. What's just right for one reader might be too slow or too fast for another. So there's never going to be, it's never going to be perfect for everybody. There's always going to be somebody who's like, this isn't quite what I was looking for. The best thing you can do, though, is to get feedback on your manuscript from your trusted writing friends and to have discussions about other novels where the pacing did or didn't work for you, because those discussions and having those moments where you're really thinking critically about why an author might have made the choices that they made, you're going to be learning so much. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. Additionally, just so you guys know, the Scribbler's Den revision course, Take Your Manuscript from Zero Draft to Hero Draft, does have a section that addresses the pacing of your novels. It does this in 2 different ways. It walks you through creating a reverse outline, which is a really cool thing. I'm going to do a video on basic reverse outlines shortly, but that's another topic, another day. As well as taking a really practical look at the actual time your novel takes by creating like a calendar of events. This is one of my personal favorite things to do, is once I've finished that draft, is to just sit down and figure out like, okay, this is what's happening on this day. And then the next day, this is what's happening. And then maybe here's 2 or 3 days where nothing of note happens. And then we pick back up on Friday, right? And you just get all those pieces moving in alignment, and you can start to see, like, is the pacing right, or is there something off here? Are we missing a scene or missing information? But either way, both of these exercises are part of that revision course. So you can click the link below to sign up and get started on revising your manuscript today. There's also a link below for our editing services. So we do offer both full and partial manuscript critiques, either with inline comments or without. So be sure to check those out, and somebody would read your novel and give you feedback on that. What are your tips for keeping the pacing on track in your writing? Please let me know in the comments below. And thank you for tuning in, Scribblers. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Happy writing!